Vladimir Vladimirovich, hello. Olga Nyazeva, Channel 1. Your state visit to Kazakhstan is coming to an end. You've been welcomed everywhere at the highest level. How would you assess the prospects for cooperation?
Positively. Kazakhstan, as I've said many times before, is not just an ally but also a reliable partner. It's very important that Kazakhstan is successfully developing under the leadership of President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, demonstrating steady and stable growth. The country's socio-political situation is stable, which is crucial for economic planning and investments. We have invested billions into Kazakhstan's economy. As I've already mentioned, our trade turnover is close to $30 billion, and it continues to grow. Our traditional areas of cooperation include space exploration, energy, and now, in modern times, high technologies. In energy projects, there's potential for expanding cooperation in nuclear energy, since we are already working together. Kazakhstan is the largest uranium producer in the world, and we have a presence in its uranium deposits. In the industrial sector, there are excellent prospects, particularly in terms of collaboration. One of the challenges which still partially remains is the issue of settlements. However, we have already transitioned over 80% of our financial transactions to national currencies, which greatly simplifies our work in the financial sector. In addition to that, we have strong humanitarian ties and good interpersonal relationships. Kazakhstan is practically a Russian-speaking country, as you've likely noticed. Unfortunately, there are always many people with their own opinions on what and how things should be done, along with criticism of ongoing processes in both Russian and Kazakh societies. This criticism does not always align with the interests of our states, including Russia. In my view, we must do everything possible to strengthen our ties without taking steps that might harm our relationship. For instance, in the energy sector, we have traditional areas of collaboration. However, significant new projects are emerging, particularly in transporting our energy resources to third countries via Kazakhstan. Traditionally, there's been a situation where one region of Kazakhstan lacks natural gas while other areas have an abundance. This creates opportunities for mutual efforts, where we supply something to Kazakhstan and receive something from Kazakhstan. Considering Kazakhstan's vast territory, collaboration in this area holds substantial potential. In our vast territories, collaboration often proves more beneficial than developing everything independently within our own borders. This makes us natural partners and allies. I believe we have excellent prospects for the future. Yesterday evening, in an informal setting over dinner, President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev and I discussed these prospects in great detail. Once again, I assess them as highly positive.
Good afternoon. Alexei Golovko, Russia Channel. You already mentioned uranium. However, this October, Kazakhstan held a referendum in which an overwhelming majority of citizens supported the construction of a nuclear power plant. As far as we know, a contractor has not yet been chosen. Did you specifically address this topic in your discussions with Mr. Tokayev? Perhaps you highlighted some of Rosatom's advantages. Thank you.
Yes, of course. We paid significant attention to this topic during yesterday's discussions, both in narrow and expanded formats. If Kazakhstan proceeds with its nuclear energy projects, it is naturally entitled to select the technological solutions and financial arrangements that best suit its needs as the client. It is no coincidence that the Russian company Rosatom is the largest of its kind globally, including in terms of the number of nuclear power plants under construction abroad. Why is that? Because, as I've said many times, we don't just build power plants. We typically create an entire nuclear industry in the country that initiates such activities. We train personnel, supply the necessary materials, manage spent fuel, and contribute to the development of nuclear science. For President Tokayev and our Kazakh colleagues and friends, this type of activity is not new. They are not starting from scratch. As I've mentioned, both of our nations have enterprises involved in uranium mining and related fields. They clearly understand what they want, what they are willing to invest in, and what they aim to achieve. They clearly understand what they want, what they are willing to invest in, and what they aim to achieve. Thus, our discussions are highly professional. If our partners in Kazakhstan wish to explore solutions, including technological ones from third countries, or to involve their specialists in collaborative efforts, this is also possible. Rosatom has experience in such international cooperation, and we discussed this as well. The final decision always rests with the client. However, I believe that cooperation with Kazakhstan in this area is quite feasible. In fact, it would be rather unusual for Kazakhstan, which holds the world's largest uranium reserves, to merely extract this resource and export it without utilizing it. This is the perspective adopted by Kazakhstan's leadership. Furthermore, it is no coincidence that Rosatom operates in 20 countries today or is constructing 20 facilities abroad. Our modern technologies are among the best in the world, especially in terms of ensuring safety. This is confirmed by the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. Please.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, following today's summit, how would you assess the state of the CSTO? Is the organization alive or dead? And how do you personally feel about Armenia's absence from the meeting?
Well, as for the CSTO as such, it is of course not just alive. It is alive and developing. All the countries that actively participate in its work are interested in maintaining these contacts both now and in the future. The situation in the world is complex, and it is not complicated only by the events happening in Ukraine. Is everything so good in Asia? Do the events on the borders of the Commonwealth countries with Afghanistan allow us to relax and ignore everything? Complex processes are taking place in Afghanistan. We hope that we will be able to build relations with Afghanistan, and we cannot overlook the fact that the situation there is stabilizing. We have relations with the current leadership of Afghanistan, and these relations will develop. Recently, Russia's Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu was in Afghanistan and reported to me on the results. But the situation is still complicated and requires our special attention, including from the CSTO. After all, the CSTO deals not only with military issues, but also with combating organized crime, drug trafficking, and so on. So the CSTO has plenty to do, and the participating countries are interested in this. This is the first point. Now, regarding Armenia's position, each country is free to choose how it wants to ensure its own security. I think that the current situation between Armenia and the CSTO is most likely driven by internal political processes in Armenia itself. And of course, all of this is connected to the aftermath of the Nagorno-Karabakh crisis. But I want to emphasize that the CSTO has nothing to do with this. Do you understand? I've said this many times already. Everything that happened does not concern the CSTO, because there was no external aggression against Armenia itself. The CSTO is intended to protect member countries from external aggression. The events related to Nagorno-Karabakh have their own specifics. After all, Armenia did not recognize Nagorno-Karabakh as an independent state, and certainly did not include Nagorno-Karabakh within its state boundaries. This means that everything that happened in Nagorno-Karabakh does not have a direct legal connection to Armenia. Therefore, to claim that the CSTO should have fought on the territory of this enclave is somewhat strange, isn't it? Right? Of course, this is a very sensitive issue. From the outside, it's always easy to give some evaluations. Inside, it's always more complicated. I'll say it again. In my view, any member country of the organization should independently determine what corresponds to its national interests. And we will respect that. The first point. And secondly, Armenia has not announced its withdrawal yet, at least not for now. They have stated that they are taking a pause, but at the same time, they support all the documents adopted during today's meeting and the current session of negotiations, and have drawn our attention to that. If that's the case, there is a possibility that Armenia will return to full-fledged participation within the organization. We'll see. Once again, I repeat, the final decision, of course, lies with the member country.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, today, during the narrow format meeting, you stated that Moscow had responded to the prolonged use of American missiles to strike Russian territory.
It's already the second response after the Orlik incident. After that, ATACMS were used twice more in the Kursk region. The damage was minimal, yet the very fact of their use, of course. We cannot ignore this, especially considering that there was damage.
And you emphasized that Moscow is ready to respond to further escalation from the West.
I didn't just emphasize it. I said that we did this last night.
Yes, and in this regard, the question is, what measures is Russia prepared to take in response?
And, in your opinion, are there any risks? Is the use of Western missiles to strike Russian territory still continuing today? Well, you should ask the Westerners who are doing this whether they intend to continue or not. Are there risks with strikes on Russian territory? I've said this many times already. Of course there are. Because this means direct involvement of Western countries, direct involvement in an armed conflict. Well, how could it be otherwise? If their specialists are setting the flight mission, passing the intelligence information to themselves, and coordinating the strikes on targets within the Russian Federation, of course, there are risks. And I said that today they received a response. Over the course of 2 days, our armed forces delivered a retaliatory strike. Today it was quite comprehensive. 90 missiles were used in the strike, along with 100 unmanned strike vehicles. 17 targets on Ukrainian territory were hit, including military, industrial, and logistical facilities that support the armed forces and defense industries. And once again, I want to say once again now, of course we will respond to such acts of aggression against the Russian Federation. How and when, with which weapons, that will depend on the target selected by the General Staff of the Ministry of Defense, because each target should be hit with its own, appropriate tool, a particular weapon. For example, using a hypersonic missile on a relatively insignificant target, which seems small in scale, would be meaningless because it's like using a cannon to shoot sparrows. But for significant targets, we will apply the means available to us, including, as I mentioned, we do not rule out the use of the Oreshnik against military-industrial targets or decision-making centers, including in Kyiv. This is in light of the fact that the Kyiv authorities continue to attempt to strike our vital objects, including in St. Petersburg and Moscow.
Yes, you have already said a lot about the Oreshnik, but Western media reports that there was no explosive in the warhead of the Oreshnik. If this is true, what does that mean? And can you share any new details about the Oreshnik with us? And how many similar secret developments of this kind do we have, as you said, on the menu, which the client will be pleased with? Thank you.
You see, when I said that we are conducting test launches, it means that this work is also aimed at improving this weapon, and that's the case. As for the striking capabilities, I've already mentioned this too. And if several such systems are used in one strike simultaneously, using 2, 3, or 4 complexes, it would be comparable in power to the use of nuclear weapons. But it is not nuclear, because it is A, highly accurate, B, not equipped with a nuclear warhead, it does not contaminate the environment, but the power will be comparable. Regarding whether there was explosive material or not, I'll repeat once again, it's being tested precisely to understand what needs to be done additionally. And there's no big secret here. Specialists will immediately understand what I mean. When I talk about improvement, it primarily means balancing between range and warhead. The greater the range, the smaller the warhead. The shorter the range, the more powerful the warhead. Because this system carries more useful weight in this case, that's all. And for targets at different distances, different types of missiles are needed, or at least different types of missile payloads. This needs to be worked on. It's not easy work, there will probably be additional R&D and so on. Regarding this missile we used, the striking elements used were appropriate elements, and they are indeed striking elements. I've already mentioned, these are powerful elements that heat up to a temperature of 4,000 degrees. I'm not sure, but you can check online, but on the surface of the sun, it's about 5,600 to 6,000 degrees, comparable to the temperature on the sun's surface. A kinetic strike, a powerful impact, like a meteorite falling. We know in history how and where meteorites fell and what the consequences were. It was enough to create entire lakes, right? The Tunguska meteorite, we know the consequences. It's the same here. The impact is very serious. Everything in the center turns to ash, disintegrates into constituent elements, and objects are hit up to 3 or 4, maybe even more floors down. And these aren't just floors, but reinforced structures. The force of the strike is colossal. Of course, we can add more, and it would be even more powerful. The main thing is that the prototype has been created, it works, and it works as planned by its creators. It's accurate weaponry of high power.
Are other similar weapons under development?
Do you think I'll tell you everything? We only revealed details about the Oreshnik after its tests were conducted. We waited until we saw the results, then made the announcement. This is one of those situations where haste is inappropriate.
Western press reports that some politicians and officials in the US and Europe are proposing to return nuclear weapons to Kyiv. What do you think? How realistic is such a development? Or is this just some kind of escalation, scare tactics? And if this actually happens, if nuclear weapons are handed over to the Kyiv regime, what actions will Russia take? Can preventive measures be adopted? And does Ukraine's non-nuclear status remain one of the conditions for a settlement?
What do you think, on the level of common sense, if the country with which we are essentially now engaged in combat operations becomes a nuclear power, what are we supposed to do? In this case, we will take and use all, I want to emphasize this, all the means of destruction available to Russia. We will not allow this, first. Second, such statements can only be made by irresponsible people who bear no responsibility and do not feel any accountability for the fate of their countries and the world as a whole. Third, if someone officially transfers anything, it would be a violation of all the commitments made in the field of non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. As for Ukraine itself, we will not allow this either. We will monitor every step, whatever happens there. This was once a very high-tech, industrially developed republic of the Soviet Union. But everything has been lost, or nearly everything that Soviet Ukraine could once be proud of has been lost. Therefore, today, starting from almost nothing would be practically impossible. Something dirty, like they say, a dirty bomb, could be made from waste from nuclear power plants, of course. But even in this case, the response would be absolutely adequate to the threats posed to the Russian Federation.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, when you spoke about possible strikes on decision-making centers, you didn't specify which centers you had in mind, military or political.
That's the first question.
The second, as the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, how do you think these strikes on the centers could also involve the Oreshnik, since it seems nothing else could reach them?
You know, in Soviet times, there was a joke about weather forecasts. The forecast was, today, anything is possible.
Hello, Vladimir Vladimirovich. The dollar and euro on the stock exchange are breaking all records. Now it may have dropped a bit, but prices are rising, and the ruble weakened against the tenge by as much as 80 kopecks overnight. There is panic among the population, at least among a significant portion of it. Can you tell us the real size of inflation? The real, not the nominal average salary in Russia? And when will we tame inflation, or will we?
You're trying to stir things up. First of all, everything that the central bank reports in terms of inflation is real. There is nothing made up there. That's the first point. Secondly, it is easy to verify. Real inflation is easily verified by independent centers that assess the state of the Russian economy and the credit financial sector. So everything the central bank says, currently it's 8.5%, right? That's accurate. Some specialists believe that with an inflation rate of 8.5%, having a key interest rate of 21% is too high. It's an inflated rate. But if you're saying that prices are rising, we still need to consider whether this rate is inflated or not. There are tools available to fight inflation without raising the key interest rate. Yes, they exist. These are various tools the central bank uses to regulate the banking sector, related to mandatory resources that banks need to hold before issuing loans. This is connected to decisions, including by the government, regarding increasing lending to the population, mortgages, social loans, and so on. There are many other tools, but it's ultimately the specialists at the central bank, according to Russian Federation law, who must make the final decision. We will see in the near future. As for the fluctuations in the ruble, it's not only related to inflationary processes. It's connected to budget payments, oil prices, and many other seasonal factors. Therefore, overall, in my opinion, the situation is under control, and there are certainly no grounds for panic, as you've said. Yes, in our country and neighboring countries, the processes are complex, but they are under control.
Recently, you had a phone conversation with German Chancellor Scholz. You hadn't been in contact for almost 2 years. Was it a surprise for you that Scholz was the first Western leader to reach out to you? And what impressions did you have from this conversation? Thank you.
First of all, we continue contacts, as strange as it may seem, with many countries with which we have very difficult relations. Yes, I haven't had direct contacts with the leaders of those countries. But I know that some of them also express a desire to resume these contacts and discuss the current issues related to the situation in Ukraine, both bilaterally and in the broader European context. Yes, indeed, Chancellor Scholz was the first to break the silence. There was nothing unexpected for me in this. We had been receiving signals about the Chancellor's desire to have a phone conversation for quite some time. As you know, we are always open to such contacts. We have never, and I personally have never refused such contacts and will not refuse them in the future. If anyone wants them, please, we are open. As for the conversation with the Chancellor, it lasted quite a long time, a whole hour, and it mainly concerned the situation in Ukraine. But there was nothing unusual in that, I think, for either him or me. He presented his position, and I presented mine, and we both remained firm in our views on this issue. Several questions were related to bilateral relations. Well, more as a side note, but in general I think dialogue is possible in the future.
A large family from Naberezhny Chelny is ready to name their child after the Oreshnik missile system. According to the head of the family, Vladimir Sukov, his wife is now 4 months pregnant. They are expecting a girl, and they are ready to name her Oreshnitsa. Could you please tell us if you've heard about this news? And if they do this, would you be ready to possibly meet them?
You know, this is their personal family matter. Maybe it would be better if they consult with the grandmother, the grandfather. Probably that would be more appropriate than consulting with me. I'm doing my job. They have this important event coming up. I wish the future mother all the best, and the whole family. As for the choice of the name for the child, that's purely a family matter, and I won't comment on it. I wish them all the best, happiness, and health.
Recently, elections of various levels have taken place, or will soon take place in many neighboring countries of Russia. Here we can recall Georgia, Abkhazia, Romania, Moldova. However, in many of these countries, the electoral process is often accompanied by mass protests. Politicians advocating closer ties with the West accuse their opponents of wanting to deviate from the chosen democratic path, of rejecting democratic values, and Russia is accused of interfering in the elections in these countries. From your side, do you see signs of Western interference in the electoral process in such countries? Do you see a threat of new orange revolutions?
And personally, what do you think explains the mood of a significant portion of voters in these countries to restore broken relations with Russia? First, I want to tell you, and you can be sure that this is either true or very close to the truth. Despite numerous contacts with countries of the former Soviet Union, including, let's say, Georgia, and probably there is mutual influence between Russia and Georgia, but on an official level, we do not interfere in internal political processes. We don't touch it at all. We just don't touch it. As for Western interference, I can't say this about our Western colleagues, in quotation marks. Why? Because if you look, and we know how many participants from various non-governmental organizations are on the payroll of foreign governments, and how many people come out for protests, I mean, members of their families, their friends, and so on, it creates a very realistic picture regarding the crowd on the streets and the number of people receiving money from foreign states for political activity within these countries. Just objectively look at it. It's semi-open information and everything will become clear. Whoever pays orders the music and they perform it in the squares. So yes, there is interference. When the events in Georgia began, honestly, I watched all of this with surprise. I was surprised. We have no relations with them, with the current Georgian leadership at all. But I just admired their courage and character, which they showed to defend their point of view. I won't even assess that point of view now. Very similar processes are happening in other countries you mentioned. If this answer satisfies you, there is nothing more to add.
Mr. President, you have repeatedly said that you are ready for negotiations on Ukraine, and you outlined the conditions for starting these negotiations. After Oreshnik demonstrated its power, will your conditions change?
You know, maybe you just didn't express yourself accurately. I didn't formulate any preliminary conditions. I didn't say that the preliminary conditions for negotiations are such and such. I simply spoke about our conditions for peace. In my opinion, the conditions for long-term, sustainable peace could be such and such, and they were detailed in my June speech at the meeting with the leadership of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. There's nothing more to repeat. We have enough weapons, although of course I understand, we all realize this, that the appearance of such weapons as Oreshnik strengthens Russia's military position, because let's be frank, it's not nuclear weapons, but the results of its use and its power, especially if several systems are used in one strike, as I've already said, are similar to the use of nuclear weapons. That means something, right? That's true. But with the appearance of new systems of weapons, our fundamental approach to resolving the situation in Ukraine does not change. We are still ready. A, for the negotiation process, and B, of course, on the conditions that I outlined in the speech before the Ministry of Foreign Affairs leadership in June of this year in Moscow. Nothing has changed.
Recently, we've been talking a lot about high-precision Western weapons and Oreshnik. But another type of weapon that has become very widespread during the Special Military Operation, SMO, is drones. Recently, Western media have reported that the Ukrainian armed forces will be supplied with new chips that will allow Ukrainian drones to bypass Russian electronic warfare, EW. How serious is this threat? Are these reports true, and how can we counter this? And the second question. We know that drone operators in the Ukrainian armed forces have been formed into a separate branch of the military. Should we do the same?
First, regarding the new chips and other technology for drones, this is possible. Drones are being used very actively on both sides, and the Ukrainian armed forces are also using them actively. We still use more drones, but they use quite a few as well. They started using drones after we began, and now they are using fiber-optic ground-controlled drones, which are completely unaffected by electronic warfare. Therefore, new chips may appear, and that is possible. I am confident that we will respond quickly. Information exchange happens very quickly, and unfortunately there is mutual enrichment of information, which is used immediately. Whoever reacts faster wins. Our soldiers, our guys, have learned to react almost instantaneously, right on the spot. A lot of highly educated people have come to the combat zone. When I read reports or listened to briefings, I am honestly surprised. I must say, frankly, it is amazing that people with very good education, with good engineering training, risked their lives and ended up in the combat zone, performing miracles on the spot. Although drones today are one of the most important factors in successful military operations, can they be passed on? Yes, they can. Today, I spoke with a narrow group within the Collective Security Treaty Organization, CSTO. Will this fundamentally change the course of combat on the battlefield? No. The Russian army is confidently advancing across almost the entire front line. I think that this will continue. Gradually, we will occupy new positions as we are doing now, thanks to the courage of our guys. I repeat this often, but it is true. Your colleagues in the combat zone, military correspondents, speak very convincingly about this. It is the truth. No one is making anything up. Question regarding a separate branch of the military. Yes, I know that this has been implemented, but we are also considering this. As for the organization of this work, that is a separate question. It is important, I agree with you, because the result of any activity depends on how well it is organized. The General Staff and the Ministry of Defense are currently thinking about this. We have a modern Minister of Defense, a person who understands these areas well, although his basic education is in economics. However, he also dealt with unmanned aerial vehicles when he was first Deputy Prime Minister. So he is well versed in this matter, and together with professional military personnel, they are working on this, considering the organization of this work. It is indeed an important question, and I agree with you.
You just mentioned Chancellor Scholz, but I have a question about another chancellor. Chancellor Merkel recently released her memoirs, in which she spends a lot of time discussing your relationship and recounts a story about how she visited you in Sochi in 2007 and met your dog Connie.
She met the dog?
Yes, she met your dog.
The police with the dog promised to come. No, the dog with the police promised to come, right? All right, sorry, I'm joking.
Many of us remember this dog. She was super friendly. Many even petted her. She really loved to roam freely. Apparently, the same thing happened when Merkel visited, and it turned out that Angela Merkel is afraid of dogs. She wrote that you supposedly exploited her fear on purpose. Was that the case? Is it true? And a bit of a philosophical tangent. What happened? How did it come to be that there was a time when the German Chancellor visited you, and you often communicated in German? And now, we are starting to develop things like the Oreshnik in the opposite direction.
First of all, regarding the dog issue. Indeed, such a case happened. Mrs. Merkel came to visit us, and my dog, Connie, came out. Honestly, I have already told her about this, Merkel, that I didn't know she was afraid of dogs. If I had known, I would have never done that. On the contrary, I wanted to create a relaxed, pleasant atmosphere. I assumed that in Europe, and in Germany in particular, where I lived for almost 5 years, people have a very positive attitude toward pets. On the contrary, I thought she would appreciate it. Later, I found out that she is afraid of dogs. It happens. As far as I remember, she mentioned that she was bitten by a dog as a child. Well, it happens, a psychological trauma. When I found out about this, I apologized to her. I said, "Angela, I'm sorry, I didn't know about this." She, with persistence worthy of a better cause, even wrote about this in her book. Honestly, it was strange and unexpected for me. We are talking, and all of this will be in the media. I once again address her and say, "Angela, please forgive me. I didn't want to cause you any emotional pain. On the contrary, I wanted to create a favorable atmosphere for our conversation. I apologize. If you ever perhaps I understand that it is unlikely today, come again. I will in no way do this." Now, on serious matters, related to how our relationship with Europe and the Western countries has developed, we even, in essence, I think, I was not involved in this, but the previous generation of leaders went as far as to break up the Soviet Union, including, it seems to me, to make Russia a part of what is now called the so-called civilized West, thinking that now, when the ideological walls collapsed, we would be part of the civilized world. Nothing of the sort happened. It turns out that in addition to everything related to ideology, there are also geopolitical issues, geopolitical interests, and they immediately showed us where our place is, somewhere in the corner. But it didn't end there. They began supporting separatist forces, terrorist forces in the Caucasus, and started shaking Russia from the inside. They had strength, they had power. We dealt with this, we went through it. What did we not offer to build relations? I've already talked about this many times, and now I don't want to spend time on it. That's it. No. NATO's eastward expansion. 5 waves, or now we can say 6. To all our objections, to all our concerns, they simply didn't care and went their own way. And that's how relations developed, including with Europe. Yes, I know. European leaders say to me, "We were against it." I've already said this. I will repeat it again. It's important. We were against Ukraine being in NATO. Well, we were against it, and we would vote against it. To my question, why then, in 2008, did you open the doors to Ukraine's NATO membership in Bucharest? The answer is simple. Well, back then, the Americans pressured us a lot. Well, there you go. And if tomorrow they pressure you even harder, will you agree to everything again and finally sign the paper that Ukraine will be a NATO member? And the position of the United States did not change at that time. The U.S. told us, "Well, not now, we won't accept them now." And do you know why not now? Because Ukraine is not ready, it must go through a preparation process for membership. Not now. When they prepare it for membership, they will accept it, and then they will pressure the Europeans again. And they will agree again. But what is happening now? This is happening before the eyes of the whole world. It seems to me that Europe has been brought down to the lowest level. It has ceased to exist as an independent center, as an independent political sovereign center of world politics. They dance the polka butterfly to the tune of the American administration at the first whistle, even to their own detriment. Sometimes I get the impression that people at a very high level in the same federal republic, in high government positions, are fulfilling some task of the American intelligence services, but they are not working in the interests of their own, in this case, the German people. How can they agree with everything that is happening there? Energy resources, say, in the U.S. market, in some states, are 3 to 5 times cheaper than in Europe, in Germany itself. Entire enterprises, entire industries are closing down in Germany and moving to the U.S. They are doing this intentionally. The Americans are pragmatic people, and perhaps they are doing the right thing in their interests. But these Europeans, it seems that if they are told, "We will hang you," their only question will be, "Do we bring the rope ourselves, or will you give it to us?" You understand? That's all. Volkswagen is closing, metallurgical enterprises are closing, chemical enterprises are closing, glass factories are closing. Thousands of people, now hundreds in any case, and perhaps thousands, are being thrown out onto the streets. And nothing. Silence. Only some fuss in the current domestic political process. And how can you talk to such partners? What is there to negotiate about? Therefore, it is not our fault that our relationship with Europe has degenerated this way. This is also the result of the internal state of the European establishment, European politics. But I hope that this will eventually pass, and relations with Europe in general, with individual European countries, will be restored. Both Russia and our European partners are interested in this. They are no less, if not more, interested in this, perhaps even more. I think that there is still a natural interest in developing relations with Russia in the interests of, excuse the repetition and tautology, their own countries and peoples will prevail. I hope so. How things will actually unfold, we'll see.
According to the Collective Security Treaty, in the event of military aggression against any of the member states, other members of the organization must immediately provide necessary assistance upon the request of the affected state. Is Russia intending to seek such assistance from the CSTO in light of long-range strikes with Western weapons on its territory? Was this discussed today, or was this issue touched upon? And are the CSTO member states ready to provide such assistance?
You know, the provision according to which any CSTO member country must assist another state that has been subjected to aggression raises no doubts for anyone. In essence, each country is ready to act within the framework of the commitments it has undertaken. But let's realistically look at the situation. What can the other countries of this organization do to assist the Russian Federation when American weapons, such as ATACMs, are striking Russian territory? It is unrealistic, but most likely, even under these conditions, we are capable of providing them with possible assistance. We have the resources and reserves to support our allies if there is a need.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, the United States approved the use of ATACMs to strike Russian territory. Does this escalation influence the possibility of establishing dialogue with the future Trump administration? How might this factor affect relations? Or are there other signals that may complicate this process?
We don't know what Mr. Trump and the current president discussed during their meeting. Without that knowledge, it's impossible to comment on their conversations. There are different scenarios to consider. If the current president, Mr. Biden, believes that escalating tensions and increasing confrontation create conditions for the next administration to de-escalate more easily, the newly elected president could say, "This wasn't me. This was the previous administration's madness. I have no part in this. Let's talk." That's one possibility. Another scenario is that the current administration may want to create additional challenges for their successors. This could also be the case. However, based on what I know about the newly elected president, he's a smart and experienced individual who has gone through the significant test of fighting his way back to the White House. What stands out most to me is not just the uncivilized measures used against Mr. Trump, such as judicial accusations and outright attempts on his life, which I believe persist even now, leaving him far from safe. History in the United States has seen various cases like this. I think he's smart enough and hopefully cautious enough to understand the risks. What shocked me more was that during the attacks against him, they didn't stop at targeting him directly. They also attacked his family, including his children. In Russia, even criminals don't stoop to such levels. When gangs fight, they leave women and children alone. It's considered off-limits. But these people targeted his family members. This is so revolting that it underscores the degradation of today's American political system. Nevertheless, the United States remains a great country. We are open to dialogue with the United States, including with the next administration.